The oceans are changing. We're seeing lots of different types of risks mounting, and what we're going to talk about today is ocean risks and what's the consequences for us. Today we're going to talk about ocean risk, which is really emerging as a big issue. So many parts of the world we see these type of very dramatic scenes where people are actually being hurt, where the whole society is being destroyed. I think the thing about ocean risk is that it's now more frequent than what we have seen before. Part of that is because we're living in more areas which actually are more vulnerable. Part of it, of course, is that we're changing the way the world works. So in this case, we also need to consider that many of the things that used to be constant are now shifting. So how much of the world is actually ocean? Well, we know it covers 73% of the planet, but in fact the actual amount of water is quite small because the Earth is quite large. So we are already impacting this little body of water in a very significant way. And what are the types of effects we have when we modify it? Well, this is quite a unique picture in the sense that it actually shows three big storms coming in at the same time. This is one of the first times that's ever been observed. So we're now seeing types of changes and the types of very dramatic damages that we didn't know of before. That's partly because the oceans are the ones that are absorbing the most heat. So 93% of the excess heat that we've actually put in the atmosphere, and due to using hydrocarbons, have now ended up being in the ocean and changing the way it works, which leads to new storms and other things. When it comes to carbon dioxide, the oceans also absorb a lot. And in fact, when it comes to sea level rise, of course, all of it is happening in the oceans. So the oceans is really where it's happening when it comes to changes in climate. Now, what kind of risks do we get with this? Well, there's a whole slew of different types of things, and this can give you some sense of it. Quite clearly, the ones that we often talk about are the big storms and the types of damaging events that we have. But there are lots of other things also. It can be anything from invasive species, algal blooms, for example, that can be very damaging locally, both to tourists and also to anyone else who's trying to grow fish farms, for example. There are many other types of risks, and we've tried to come up with a bit of a typology so we better understand what these risks are. There are a number of ocean hazards that are now growing, and clearly our interaction with our environment is starting to make all kinds of differences. These can be all kinds of things like habitat loss, pathogens, invasive species, and the lack of governance that puts us in a very bad situation and ultimately leads to new ocean hazards. These type of hazards then translate into risks. And the fact that we don't really understand the ocean properly, because it's shifting, we don't have the baseline to measure it against sometimes. That makes it quite difficult for us, which then leads to the fact that we're not really prepared to deal with this in an appropriate way. This is trying to give us a bit of a sense of the changing climate landscape, the changing types of hazard that we have, and then the changes in the risk landscape, which really then leads us into how do we deal with this risk? What are the ways that we can mitigate it, perhaps insure against it, and make sure that for the future we are prepared to deal with the many shifts that are happening. So the whole idea of having ocean risk insurance is now really growing in the insurance community. And I think this is a growing type of insurance that we're just starting to see the beginning of. One of the interesting aspects is if we can have healthy ecosystems, we can also insure the infrastructure in such a way that some of the damages will be mitigated or even avoided in some cases. With the changes in the ocean, we can only wonder how a species like the Greenland shark would have reacted. It was born maybe 400 years ago and will have seen very large changes in the ocean. What will the ocean look like 400 years from now?